fishing, it's in my soul.
Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds, drop the hammer. Back with my main man, Pastor Johnny Kelly. What's up, dude?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good. You doing good?
Yes, you can see here if you're watching on YouTube, got a cool new backdrop that our good friends at Zoom have allowed us to put cool pictures behind us. That's myself and my all-white Don Johnson jumpsuit, and my dad in the Bahamas, growing up catching some marlin. But if you're listening to this for the first time, this is, I believe, now our fourth episode of Salt Strong Unchurched, something that we felt that we were called to do with our platform. And this is not, I want to say, and this is going to be a really tough topic, by the way, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to godly people? And I want everyone to know that this is not a sermon, even though there'll be parts of it that might sound like it. We want all of these to be more of a discussion. And one of the main reasons that we're doing this, so these are the same questions that we have. These are the same questions that I still struggle with when bad things do happen and things that I don't have the answers for. And I've read the Bible quite a few times. I still am confused by a lot of it. A lot of it does give me clarity and gives me a lot of hope and love and gratitude for my life, and it's helping me understand more. But that's a big reason we're doing this. So this is going to be a tough one, and I want to start off by telling just kind of a personal story that's always stuck with me that ties into this, and then I want to hear from you, Pastor, on some of these really hard-hitting questions. But we had a girl at our office. This is back when I lived in Atlanta, and she came in with like a pretty nasty cold, like shouldn't have been there cold, and she was just talking about how bad it stinks and nose is dripping. And one of the guys who's like always that happy-go-lucky guy, he was definitely a devout Christian, always just nothing ever got to him. And he's like, "Oh man, I love colds." And I was like, "What?" I was like, "Are you crazy?" He's like, "Yeah, man, I love getting colds. I love like when little small things like that happen." And we're looking at him like, "What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind?" And we're like, "Tell us why." He's like, "Well, like every time I get a cold or even a little small case of the flu, yeah, you get down and you kind of feel like, you don't see the end in sight and you feel like it's going to be like that forever. But man, when it goes away, that feeling of now realizing what being healthy, it feels like," he's like, "that's unexplainable." He's like, meaning without the cold or without the sickness, I would never know how good it feels and how amazing it feels to feel good. And he gave the analogy of like, wintertime, and wintertime's not bad here in Florida, but even Atlanta, like winters kind of stink, right? And a lot of people up north know that. And there's a reason that you have a season of your life like winter so that you can appreciate how amazing it is. I remember that first day of spring, it's like everything's amazing. It's like the first day when you come back from a sickness. And even on our last episode, I had massive throat issues. I was like dying. I had like 2 throat lozenges in the entire time. And now when it finally got better, I woke up one morning without this allergy. It's like, man, this feels amazing. And I know that's a really, really small issue compared to some things we're going to talk about, but it was a story that always stuck with me because I thought he was absolutely nuts when he said it. But every time I've gotten sick or had some kind of sickness or allergies, it does really make you appreciate it. And I feel like you're kind of growing and understanding when all of a sudden awesome things do happen after that bad season. So first and foremost, Johnny, like what are the questions that you hear? I assume it's around death, right? And I know after our first episode, we had some people that said, "Hey, I lost my wife. I lost my child." Like, how do you explain that? Why would God let that happen to me?
It's based around anything. You get a lot of it around death. Terrorism, child abuse. The Bahamas being killed by a hurricane for days on end, people suffering, genocide. I mean, it's just, you get those questions based on what affects you emotionally, and it's a huge question, a day doesn't go by without somebody somewhere asking that question. And honestly, probably a day doesn't go by when a lot of us don't ask that question, like, God, if you're there, if you're here, if you truly love us, why don't you do something about it? Like, why don't you do this? And so I think it's a normal question completely. I'm a pastor, and it's a question that I've asked. Like, I've looked at that and gone, why are you having to walk? Why do we have to walk through so much pain sometimes? I think a good way to think about it, though, is I'm starting from the basis of the point of, if you're asking why would God allow this to happen, then you're at the place where you believe in God, whether or not you're living for him or following after him or doing what his teachings say. I'm just sort of basing it in that place, just because it's sort of, you're saying that question, why is God doing this? And you might be using it as the reason why you don't believe in him too. But Joe, imagine for a second, like, if you could actually tell God what to do, if you could tell him, like, what are some of the things you would suggest to him? Like, what would you say? Like, stop the terrorism. Like, that's a good starting point, I think, right? Like, stop murders. The world would be a better place, right? Like, terrorism's gone, murder's gone, everything's good there. And obviously there would still be suffering, though, because there would still be broken people doing broken things. All these things are just things that people do, so we say, okay, God, let's eradicate pedophilia. Let's get rid of this stuff, because if there's anything that is more, I don't think there's much of anything more disturbing or horrific than that. Get rid of, drug dealers, whatever, get rid of thieves. And the more we do that, the more we would see the world getting, at least in our minds, to be a better place. But it still wouldn't be perfect. So you see, when we ask God to get rid of suffering, a lot of times I think eventually we would get to the place where we go, hey, God, let's get rid of gossipers. Let's get rid of people that are lying. Well, that's us. That's all of us. We all, I think the hard part is that we view a scale on these things. And if we're asking God to get rid of suffering, we're asking him to get rid of us, because we are the reason for this stuff. People are. We're broken. We're messed up, and God's there loving us, trying to get us to be better. I think of the like this week, the other night, my wife's upstairs, and I hear her. I'm downstairs with the baby, and she's upstairs, and she's taking a shower, and my other two boys, my older boys, are in the bathtub, and I hear her scream, "Daddy, get up here right now," which is like never a good thing. And I start running upstairs, and as I'm running, my feet get wet downstairs, and I look around and I see water streaming all over my house, like streaming down from the second floor in random places all over the place. And I run upstairs, and there's like half an inch of water upstairs. It's everywhere. And I go in the bathroom, and I see my boys, and they're 4 and 7, and they're peering over the edge of the tub, like terrified, because Daddy just came up here, and the water's all the way to the top, and they've just been splashing. They didn't overflow it. They splashed that much water out because they were playing and going nuts. And I got upset. I made them get out, and I'm like, you stand there right there while I clean this. I made them just stand there and wait for me to clean the floor and everything, and then put them right into bed. And I had to kneel down, and just at the end of the night, when I'm putting them to sleep, I had to say, guys, I'm sorry if I got too angry. I didn't mean to. And the thing is that they were terrified. They were scared, because they had caused something, and all of a sudden they were getting suffering for it, and Daddy was causing this. And so for me, it was this moment where I look and I go, man, these things, we all cause suffering at some point. All of us. I mean, there's nobody here, nobody watching or listening that hasn't caused suffering at some point, whether it's intentional or just a reaction or emotional, but it's something we all deal with. And so the real question, I think, when it comes down to it, is that it's less about there's two parts to it. I was telling you earlier, there's two parts to that question of why would God let bad things happen to people, and when we say that, it's an accusation to God. And a lot of times I think it's because we don't understand, but most of us in that moment are experiencing, really acute pain. We're experiencing relationship hurts or physical problems, illnesses, painful circumstances. Maybe whatever, you got fired, you got blamed for something, you did something, whatever. But we all have. I mean, you get the idea. Like, we all do these things, and we make the accusation to God. Why would you let this happen? Why would you? But we do it through our own perspective. We do it through our own eyes. Years ago, I was at a church in a different area of the country, and we had a little girl who was, I think, about 7 years old, and she got cancer. And that's a why God moment. Like, if there ever was. Like, I look at my son who's 7, and like, that just kills me. And she was the most positive little girl, loved God. And she recorded a little video for her funeral. And it broke my heart. But she understood something that all of us that were here, that were asking, why would you let that happen, didn't understand. She understood that if we're starting from the place of there is a God, if we're starting in that position, then God isn't allowing that child to die. She understood that the child isn't losing its life. God's perspective was that life was never lost. That life was moving on to the best place in the world, to heaven. And that was the perspective. That's the God perspective. And we take part of the God perspective of why you're ever powerful and supposed to be loving. Why are you letting this happen? And we forget the whole, like, I love you so much, I want to be with you part. And it's a lot of it comes down to the perspective of being, hindsight's 2020. We look back at the things that, I mean, if you think about think like 5 or 6 years ago or 10 years ago about the thing that you were most terrified of, that you had the most anxiety over, the thing that was most painful. And now look, usually it's not in the same position anymore. And there are occasions when it is, but I look at my life now and how God has used some of the really painful moments to help make a difference in the world. I grew up, like we talked a few weeks ago, I was a bigger kid. I was a good sized kid, and
Chunky monkey.
I was a big boy, and I got made fun of a lot. I didn't have any friends, not a lot of friends. I had a couple of good friends, but I was lonely, a lot. Eat at lunch alone, just cry to myself. Like, I was depressed. I felt alone, like utterly alone. I had a couple of good friends, and I remember I was in the wrestling team, because at my school, if you were fat, that was the only sport you could really do. And they let me do it. And I wasn't any good, but I wrestled. And my teammates started making fun of me. And I got so angry and so hurt. I remember I got up and I ran into the boiler room of the school, with like this work room. And I got so angry, I grabbed a 2x4. I was in like 8th grade. So I was like 15 years old. And I come running back on the mat with this 2x4, swinging it. Like, I was so angry. I was so hurt. And I loved God. I was a Christian. I loved God. I prayed. I did all these things, but I just consistently felt alone. And I came running in. I didn't realize that it was a 12-foot 2x4. And I was like this short, fat kid. And I'm trying to swing this thing and it's moving at about an inch an hour. And they're just laughing and making fun of me more. But it was a pain. Like, that season of my life was a pain that lasted for decades. Like, it would be really easy for me in this moment to feel hurt and pain from that, from 25 years ago. But I look around my church now and I see why, or at least how God used that. And I see people that are hurting or in pain, people that are on the fringe. They some of them are very, we have cool, awesome people in our church, but we have people that are maybe a little awkward, and not as hip as what the world would want. And they have a friend in me, they have a friend at our church. I'm able to love on those people in a way that I wouldn't have had I not walked through some of that pain. And it's not that God is creating it. We live in a world that's broken. We live in a messed up world. God's not creating it. We have the freedom to make the choices that we do, and the reason, if he made life perfect for us, then there would be no choice. We would all choose him. And if we were choosing him by default, then it's not really choosing to love somebody. It's being forced to, and God wants us to love him the way he loves us. He wants us to love him because we love him. I don't want, my wife to love me because she has to. I want her to love me. And that's it. And in the same way, God just wants us to love him. And so because of that, he gives us those choices. And when he gives us those choices, it allows us to make bad choices. It allows us to bring suffering in this world. And if we watch what he does, what God does in the background, is he tries to use those sufferings and because they happen, they're going to happen. There's nothing you're going to do to stop it. Tries to use it for his glory to try and make a difference in the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think what's so interesting is you're saying this, I'm thinking that most of us would all agree that this world would be the most boring place ever if nothing bad ever happened. Right? Because if there was never any challenges to anything, if everything you woke up and everything was just super easy for the rest of your life, it sounds like an awesome fairy tale, but that would actually be pretty boring. Right? Even look at some of the best businesses still standing today in America came out of the Great Depression. They talk about companies like the Disney and stuff. These companies that we all know and love, they all came usually at really, really bad times. But the irony, we all agree with that yeah, the world would be pretty mundane and boring if everything was just perfect. It wouldn't even feel right. We know the only way we're going to grow is by being challenged, right? Even at a gym, we've talked about that before. The only way to grow your muscles is to make them hurt a little bit, right? The only way to get fit, the only way you lost your weight was you had to hurt a little bit. I guarantee you had some days where you were aching and felt like you just got in a fight. We all know that we have to have challenges, but we don't want it to happen to us. And when it does, that's when the emotion comes out. And even me, like with my anxiety attacks, we've talked about it before. I dealt with that for 14 years. It's not like 14 days and I had a couple of panic attacks and it was over. I had hundreds and hundreds. I could not see the end in sight. That was a time where I was so confused. And I asked that question over and over again, God, why can't I have a normal life? Why? I literally had to make every decision of every single day based around my anxiety attacks. Yeah. And now looking back, I see what a blessing it was. I did not see it during the time. I was mad, angry, confused. And now I see he did it for a reason. I've been able to share the story. It's made me more confident. I never would be doing this right now had I had it. I was deathly afraid to go out there and be in front of people, to talk to people, to be a voice. I did not want to be around people. I was even though I grew up being a social person, you could tell I'm still, I would say, kind of more extroverted than introverted. But at the same point, man, during that time, like I went to work and I was on phone sales. So like I literally sat in a cubicle, didn't have to talk to anybody. And I went home and I usually drank. And if my friends at the time were all my drinking buddies, and that was it. But man, looking back at that, it was one of the biggest blessings that I've ever had in my life. And now to your point, I'm able to sympathize with people. I've helped people out on airplanes when I notice the second they're having a panic attack.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed it with family members, and I've been able to help guide them through it. And I feel like I'm now changing lives, and my life was changed for the positive, all because of that. It wasn't even a season, it was many seasons, but it was a really long time of dealing with some suffering that I could not understand.
Well, and I mean, the question in and of itself is making some assumptions, like what is good, what is evil, and who decides it? Like we're deciding it based on, and obviously we can make some predetermined statements, like Hitler was bad. He was evil. But most evil people, when they're doing what they're doing, don't even think they're evil. They think they're doing it for a good reason. And I think the fact that we all have sort of, it's a moving line. It makes it really hard to give an answer that says, well, this is how this happens, or this is why it happens. The reason why it happens is we live in a world that gives freedom, that we live in a place where you're allowed to be free and make those decisions. And we live in a world that's broken, that's messed up. I look back at, we talked about it in the very first podcast, about the drugs and stuff that I did. And, that was bad for me. And it was not a good place for me to be in, but God used it, and now I can help people that are walking through the same issues, in a way that I couldn't have if I hadn't done that. I remember for me, the scariest moment for me had to do with my wife. I spent, we were in our 30s. Our anniversary is today. Actually, it's our 9th anniversary today.
Anniversary.
Thank you. While we were recording this, it's our 9th anniversary, and we met. We were in our 30s when we got married. We had both moved away from family and lived in different areas of the country, and we were in our careers, and both of us had sort of gotten to the point where we resigned ourselves to I'm just going to be alone. We were okay with it. We were both, and that was the moment we met. And I can, as terrifying as it felt at the moment, I can tell you the moment I met her, I was like, well, yeah, I'm going to marry her. There was no question in my mind. She was just so great and so incredible. And we very quickly made that decision, hey, we're going to do this. Now, we waited a couple of years to get married, but we knew, almost immediately, we want to make this work. And we had been dating just a few weeks, and we went to a Christmas party, and we left the Christmas party, and she wasn't feeling good. She was feeling sick to her stomach. And I had to pull over the car for her. She got sick, and took her home. And I'm like, you go to sleep, baby. You get some rest. And I went home, and the next day I called and talked to her, and she was feeling worse. And the next day it was worse. And finally, she went to the hospital and had 105-degree temperature. And spent about a week in a hospital with them trying to figure out what was wrong with her. And they couldn't figure it out. I had a doctor flat out, and I'm not even exaggerating. The doctor looked at me and he said, man, I really wish we had House here. You know that TV show House?
Yeah.
Which evoked absolutely no confidence when your doctor looks at you and goes, man, I really wish we had a fictitious character here.
Because we have no clue what's going on.
Because we have no clue. And eventually she was moved and transferred to Tampa General. where she was immediately put in ICU. And over the course of the next few days went through, well over a dozen blood transfusions because her body was destroying her blood. And she went into complete liver failure. And they couldn't figure out why. They couldn't figure it out. She got as jaundiced as you get. Her liver was failed, and she was just yellow. And I remember sitting there, and we hadn't been dating super long, but I knew that this is the woman I loved, that I wanted to marry her. But I also was in a place where it would have been easy to walk away. We haven't been dating long. I could just sort of walk away and let your family handle this. And, but I sat there going, God, I know that you have a plan here. I know that you have a plan. And the doctor that night before I left, because I wasn't able to stay overnight, it was the ICU, you couldn't stay overnight. The doctor looked at me and said, you're a pastor, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, you need to pray. He says, if we don't find her a new liver, she's number one on the UNOS list to get a new liver. If we don't find her one tonight, she's dead tomorrow morning. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I've spent 30 years on this planet looking for somebody, and I found her. God, you gave her to me, and now she's gone. And I went home and we prayed, and this moment of walking into the hospital the next morning and not knowing what I was going to find, like, it was the longest walk I've ever taken. I remember walking up and walking on the hallway, and as I get close to the room, I was terrified to open the door because I didn't know what I was going to find. Like, her gasping her last breath. Maybe she died 5 minutes ago, whatever. And I walk in and I see my wife sitting up. Face is pink now, no more yellow. And the doctor's going, I don't understand it. And she had basically a couple of different sicknesses and diseases that contributed to it. She had to end up going on chemo and some other things to fix it. And it was a long journey for a couple of years after that to get her back to healthy. And we still have issues at times from that, from a decade ago. But it's amazing how in the midst of that pain in that moment of me sitting there, like, feeling utterly alone, like I don't have any rights here. We're just dating. We're not even married yet. I mean, she's my wife now and has been for 9 years today. But I remember sitting there going, God, why would you let me meet this woman and then take her away? But the level of love and closeness that Sarah and I grew because we walked through that together has made our marriage stronger than it would have ever been without that. And I'm not saying that I would want to go through it again. It sucked. Like, it was horrible. But it has allowed us, to grow closer together. And the idea, the reason I'm telling some of these stories is just to show you that there is perspective on the other side of pain, that there is a place to, and I'm not trying to make light of the pain because it sucks. It's hard, We planted our church a few years ago. I started this church, about 6 years ago. And now you cut to 2 years into the church, we got pregnant. We were extremely excited and got a few months in, far enough to where everybody knew. And we lost the baby. And if you're a girl listening to this that has walked through that, I'm sorry. It is utterly painful. And as a guy, as the husband, it's equally as hard. It's just different because you have to be strong for your wife in that moment and try to be and be there to support. But it destroyed me on the inside. A little baby blueberry, that's what we called. We think it was a her, but we don't know. And it took a bunch of years to get to a place where we were really comfortable talking about it. And a couple of years ago, my wife decided to do a blog. She has a blog that she writes, and she did a blog, this very long one, talking about baby Blueberry, about us losing this baby. The pain that came from that was so big. But it's also a pain that is very, unfortunately, very common. A lot of us have walked through it, through that one exact pain. And my wife has been able to love these women that have walked through that. It's allowed me as a man to be able to step next to people in my church or just other people that I've met that have walked through it, step next to the man and say, look, it's okay to hurt. It sucks. It's not fun. And that question, why would God let this happen, is a question that gets asked of me almost every time. And the answer is, we live in a broken world, and God gives us some freedoms, and that freedom leads to some pain and brokenness and sickness and disease. But it also leads to me finding a wife that I love and me having 3 kids that love me. They're good and they're bad, and they come at the same time sometimes. And while you're walking through that scary moment, it sucks. It's just, there's nothing that feels good about it. God is still there holding out his hand saying, I love you. You know, and for us, I believe that when he was holding his hands out in that moment saying, I love you, that he was holding our baby. Our baby didn't die. Our baby just, God loved that baby more and said, I want him now. And so for the life of me, it comes down to having a perspective and understanding that it's not that God is allowing it. It's that God allows us to make choices, and our choices have consequences. And the world that we live in has made choices that lead to consequences. We understand that in the physical realm. We understand that, you know, the things we've done lead to, red tide or, algae or the death of oyster beds. Like, we get that. But we have a hard time grasping the fact that the things we do can lead to painful things happening in our personal lives. But in the midst of all that pain that is just there, and we're going to walk through, God still loves you. He still loves me. He still loves us. He hurts while we hurt. And it's not something that he was immune to. Jesus came to this earth and went through one of the most painful things ever. You know, it wasn't something that God was immune to. He watched his son die because we were in a broken world, and he wanted to give the opportunity for us to find him. And so, it's just a point of looking at things and saying, you know what, I understand that God has bigger plans, but I also understand that a lot of the pain that comes from this earth, it's just that it's coming from this earth. It's a broken place.
Love it, dude. That was powerful. There's a pastor in Miami, Rich Wilkerson.
Jr.
Yeah. I listened to something he said about the pain and suffering. And I love it. It's, don't let pain and suffering define you. Let it refine you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let it define you. Let it refine you. And I mean, one of the worst things that you can do, and I've seen some friends do this, that you have a time of suffering, whether it be losing a child or a loved one. We've all lost loved ones. We've all had cancer affect us either personally or a family or a close loved one. And instead of letting it just be a short season of suffering, you let it define your life. And all of a sudden it's something that carries on multiple years, and you're full of angst and anxiety and anger. And I think at least for me, I always try to find that silver lining in everything. And I've got a younger brother, Daniel, and another one, just, man, tough to talk about. So, I'm the oldest, then Luke, and then Daniel was born, and my parents knew right away that something was off. He wasn't walking and talking. He wasn't even really moving like a normal baby should. And pretty early on, I was 6 at the time, but I still remember my mom just crying. She just couldn't understand. Well, God, why we did everything right. You didn't drink, during pregnancy. You did all these perfect things, and you even make it to the point where you have a baby, right? And to your point, a lot of women don't even get that far, and you have it, and everything's fine, and you actually get to take it home, and all of a sudden it can't walk or talk. And so someone has to tell you that your son is never going to walk or talk for the rest of his life. And I'm crying because I remember the pain that my parents went through. I remember the confusion of us as young kids. Like, man, why can't he come play with us? Why can't my little bro play soccer with us? Yeah. And I never had an answer for it until probably about 10 years ago. And every time that, man, I've had those tough days and there's like just crap going on in your life, I always think, man, look at my little brother Daniel. And I know God put him here for a reason. He's 32. He's still alive, which is a miracle in itself. It's someone who's never walked or talked a day in his life. He's lived his entire life in a wheelchair. He can't even wipe his own butt. He can't eat by himself. I mean, everything has to be done for him. Can't dress himself. And yet the dude wakes up happy as can be, happy that he has the ability to take a breath and to even be around. And had that not happened, I would not have the same perspective I do on life. And now looking back, our little brother Daniel he's truly tied our family together. He's gotten us stronger than ever before. He's literally changed our life for the best and give us a new perspective on everything, including when we see people who have disabilities. I mean, he's made us appreciate everything that we have. And I'm pretty certain, you mentioned earlier, like, we're defining what's good and bad. I mean, that was one of the best things that happened to our life. And I think God puts people like that, which is certainly in the sense of the worldly view, that's a bad thing. If your son is never going to be a walker talker in his life and is not going to live a normal life and is not going to have a normal life expectancy, that is never, ever a good thing. And yet now, here looking back, it's one of the biggest blessings in our life. Yeah. And he continues to he just radiates joy and love. And like, people almost don't understand it. They're like, how is this little dude, he's 33 years old now. He's still little to me, but how is this little guy in the wheelchair so stinking happy?
He's always happy.
He's always happy.
He's always happy.
Doesn't get down. And here's where I'm going with this. And I think what I mentioned earlier about don't let the bad things, pains, suffering, or even guaranteed long-term pain and suffering, never being able to walk. And he's had multiple surgeries where they had to break his back because he sits in a wheelchair all day long, and your back is not meant to do that for 33 years. I mean, He's had more pain than any of us can imagine, and yet he has a choice every single morning when he wakes up. He has a choice every night. He has a choice every waking hour, and he can choose to be happy and to be thankful. And God, thank you for whatever reason I'm in this season of my life. Thank you. He has gratitude, or he can be pissed off at the world and say, God, why did you do this to me? This isn't fair. Those are his choices, and those are the same two choices that we have. Every single bad thing that's happened in my life, and I've seen it in friends' lives and family members and just the world, there's always some silver lining, and it's up to us to choose if we want to see that or not. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. It is whether the pain is something that we caused, or whether it is something that just happened to us, whether we deserve it in our minds, whether we don't deserve it in our minds. Pain's coming. I mean, it is. It's life. But it's taking that perspective and saying, you know what, God, you are bigger, and you love me in the middle of that. You know, when bad things happen and in our lives, so many times, like suffering, grief, it's like they confront us. It's like that suffering is like bows up on us and wants to fight. That grief like gets in our face. And it makes us, it gets so in our face, I think a lot of times, that it blocks our view, and all of a sudden we feel an absence of God in that moment. And so it comes down to understanding that the head issue of understanding that, hey, good things happen and bad things happen, and that's the world we live in. That that not only we have to deal with that, but understanding that as somebody who follows after God, that we have to understand that God is there to comfort us in the middle of that suffering. That His strength isn't always going to be shown by stopping the suffering, but at times His strength is like, hey, you live in a broken world and that suffering is going to come, but my strength is there to show you comfort in the middle of that. My strength is there to grieve with you in the middle of your grief. My strength is there, like in Job, to sit in the ashes, to sit in the dump with you and just say, I'm here for you. And as a Christian, that's what I try to do. I want to be there to help, comfort people, to grieve with them, to sit in the trash with them and just love on them, to bear their burdens, to go, you know what? I'm not going to make you do this alone. I'm going to walk with you on it. I think it's why in the middle of those kind of situations, church and having somebody there is so important. To always be there saying, hey, I'm going to grieve with you. I'm going to love you. I'm going to comfort you.
I love it. And I know somewhere in the Bible, it talks about that any time that your faith is tested through suffering and pain, it's just getting you closer to becoming more complete, to the person that God has designed you to be. And I know, at least in my life, every time that I feel like there's no end in sight, and like it's the times where you're looking up to the sky or taking early walks in the morning, and whether it's financial, relationship, just you feel like you've lost, like your hope is lost. Usually there's always a big breakout moment right after that, and you can't see it, right? But it's certainly, it seems like every time I've hit what I call rock bottom, is what we say in society, that hey, rock bottom, usually that next step is going to be like the step that, like, okay, like this is why I just had to go through this. Like something big usually happens right after that. So if you are going through a tough time, all I can tell you is keep taking one step at a time, in faith and then in gratitude. I think one of the biggest things for me, Johnny, and this was not easy, and I ain't saying this is easy at all, is to be grateful for all the bad things happen to you. And I started doing that, and that's how I got out of anxiety. If you guys want to know, I talked about it in a video, but one of the biggest things was actually getting closer to God and having faith and just saying, God, I don't get it. I am confused. I don't have any idea why you're making me go through this, but I'm grateful for it because I know it's going to make me stronger. And I would actually write it down for those of you watching YouTube. Well, you can't see because of my crazy green screen thing. But every morning I write down what I'm grateful for. One of the things on there every time is my brother Daniel. But even in the worst of times, I write it down, and there's something magical about it. I know one guy in the very first episode put some comments down, and it sounded like he was going through a really tough time, and I did reach out to him personally. For those of you that saw that comment, even talking about suicidal stuff, it sounded like, and that was one of my things, like, dude, you don't have any money to give it away. That's okay. Like, just be grateful that you even have a life right now, that you're healthy. It was more of a financial issue that he was going through, and some relationship stuff because of a lack of money. I was like, dude, you can still be grateful for a lot. I know it's easier for me to say that, but every time I've just woken up and prayed over it and written down even the bad stuff that I'm grateful for, it just seems like all of a sudden I'm out of that fog and out of that darkness a whole lot quicker, and magical things start happening shortly after.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we get, rather than getting caught in that fog. I remember, I'll tell this one last story. My son Linus, he's 4 now, but when he was 3, he was at daycare, and he really struggled at the daycare he was at. He was on, red every day. Like he was the bad kid, but he's not a bad kid. He's tough. But is one of the most loving, caring kids. And I'd pick him up and see what color he was on and be like, buddy, what's going on? And I wasn't mean. I wasn't yelling at him or anything like that, but I would, buddy, why are you doing this? Why are you not listening? Why are you not obeying? Why are you not? And it was like every single day, that's what he was getting from me. And I remember sitting back and going to pick him up. It was earlier this year. And he's 3 years old. 3 years old. And I pick him up and we're walking back to the car, and I'm like, what color did you get? And he's like, red. And I was like, buddy, what's going on? And he just let go of my hand and just stopped. And it wasn't fake. And it wasn't overly emotional. It was just tears streaming out of his face. And he said, I always mess up, Dad. I'm always messing up. And I realized that my perspective on what the issues we were dealing with my son had narrowed my mind so much to where the very first response he got from me every day was, you screwed up. And his heart was just broken. Like it was, and I scooped him up. I said, no, it's okay. I love you so much. I picked him up. I'm crying in the parking lot of the school. And I'm like, you want to go get ice cream? I took him and got him ice cream. But I realized that how often our first response to the bad things happening is accusation, is anger. And the whole time, he just wanted me to love him. And I think that's a lot of the ways it happens with God. We live in a broken world, and he's not causing necessarily all. And we came to find out later that a lot of the issues he was having weren't him. It wasn't his fault. And it wasn't something he was doing wrong. We moved into a different class. He was immediately green every day. And it was just the way it was. And the teachers were like, no, he's acting the same way. Well, so it wasn't something he was doing. It was an environment. It was something else that was happening. But yet his mind, his little 3-year-old mind, all he thought was, I always mess up. I always screw up. What is wrong with me? I'm bad. And so often I think our minds get to, I'm always hurting. I'm always in pain. This bad stuff's always happening. I always mess up. It can be one of a million things. And we are like that to ourselves, and we're like that to God. Like, God, why are you letting this happen? Why are you letting? And he's going, I didn't make it happen. I didn't let it. It happens. I just want you to hold me and love me. Like, that's what my son wanted at that moment. He just wanted me to pick him up and love him. It created a moment for me and my son. Like our relationship legit changed that day. And I was able to share that with our church, and I watched a lot of people's lives change because of that little message, this little pain that he had walked through. And I say little, to him it was everything. I mean, it was getting red at daycare. Well, we have the perspective as adults to go, well, that's no big deal. And red at daycare, whatever. But to him, that was his world. And he felt like no matter what he did, his world was always messed up. And I was so focused on that I wasn't focusing on showing him the love that he needed. And I think we get so focused on what we've done wrong or what has been done wrong to us that we don't focus on the love that we need from God.
Powerful, brother. Well, we are going to end it there. I think we'll have to come back and do another one. Sorry for all
there's more on this topic for sure.
All the crying on it. And as we started this whole discussion, this is a discussion, not a sermon. I don't think either of us have the answers. We have very, very unique perspectives on both going through some tough times with, family, friends, loved ones, and just, our own personal journeys. And we're all on a personal journey. And all we ask is if you guys like this at all, let us know. I'd love to hear from you. Pastor Johnny would love to hear from you as well. And obviously, if you're in Central Florida, to show up at his church there in Lakeland. And then to share this episode, whether you're listening on iTunes or the YouTube, Facebook, saltstrong.com, wherever, share it with someone that you love, maybe someone who's going through a tough time and just needs to hear that you're not alone. And to me, that was a massive transformation for me as well, on the anxiety and stuff of just knowing that I'm not alone. Even for my mom, and dad, when they find out they have a kid with severe cerebral palsy who's never going to walk, to have another group like that of parents who have gone through it and been in their shoes and just can comfort them and love on them. So once again, if you like this, got any value, please share it. Reach out to us. And Pastor Johnny, what's the name of your church and how can they find you? What are your service times and all that?
Discover Family Church. Discover Family Church. We are in North Lakeland, right off I-4 in Lakeland, Florida. And so if you're on vacation in Florida, you want to go visit, come on out. But we 10 o'clock Sunday mornings, discoverfamilychurch.com. But if you want to email me, it's just Johnny, JOHNNY, Johnny at discoverfamilychurch.com. I'd love to chat, love on you, sit in the ashes with you, comfort you, whatever you need.
Love it, brother. Thank you guys again. And my email is Joe, Joe, at saltstrong.com. So Joe at saltstrong.com. Let us know what other topics that you want us to do. It's Salt Strong here. We are a fishing company, but this is something we're called to do every Sunday to bring a little bit more joy and love and hope into the lives of our audience and whoever else we happen to reach. So let us know other topics. It's something that I for sure enjoy doing, and we mutually both want to know what other topics that you guys want us to cover. So that's it. We be out. I apologize for the crying and the dead air time for those of you who listen, but that was
cutting an onion down below the screen. Nobody knows. A lot of onions down there.
All right, guys, we're out.
Peace.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul, it was pain.